Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the closing session of the ECEPS conference, Early Care and Education Pathways to Success. I'm Bob Lanter. I will be your facilitator for this closing session. I'm the Executive Director of the California Workforce Association. And on behalf of the association, we are thrilled to be part of the ECEPS conference. We'd like to thank Randy Wolf and all of the organizers for bringing this important information to all of you. This morning, really thrilled because we're trying out a new format, a new conference format. And, you know, I'm always excited about that. But just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. First, you know, the webinar is being recorded, and there'll be a link to the recording that will be posted in the ECEPS website. So take a look for that. Second, I did talk to you all a little bit about this fishbowl. That's what we're going to be doing right now. And for the next hour, we're going to be in a fishbowl, and keeping with the intent of the fishbowl format, there will be no audience comments or questions, but that's okay. You'll still be engaged and interacting with us. So just a second, I'll explain how it's going to work. And if you have any technical difficulties throughout this session between now and the end of the conference, there's the numbers on the screen. You can call 209-683-0562, or you can email conferences@foundationccc.org. All right. I think that's all the housekeeping pieces. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what the organizers of this conference had in mind with the fishbowl conversation. It's going to be a visionary for sure, engaging in really practical conversation that will center on the interface between the world of ECE, early childhood education, and the world of workforce development in California. And what we want to do with the presenters, it's like if we're going to be sitting down to dinner and we were at the conference, and, you know, at the end of the conference, you guys have all been there, you're probably missing this right now, but you go to a conference and at the end of the day, you say, hey, Eric, Abby, Marianne, do you guys want to go out for dinner? And as we sit down for dinner, we just start talking about the events of the day and the issues of workforce development and early childhood education. And in doing that, you know, we don't have the answers, but you all will benefit from our insight and experience, because I invited some really cool people to have dinner with me. And we're going to talk about where ECE fits into statewide plans for apprenticeship, and how the WIOA-funded workforce system, how it fits into not only the apprenticeship program, but the WIOA-funded workforce system. We're going to discuss barriers to the early childhood education sectors in terms of receiving funding and priority status as quality jobs, right? And how they are aligned, how that sector is aligned to California's high road framework. And we'll talk about much, much more. But the idea is you get to eavesdrop in on the conversation. And then at the end, you'll be able to interact with Randy as she closes down the conference. So we hope you sit back, grab your breakfast, cup of coffee, tea, and enjoy the conversation. I'm now going to invite my fellow conversationalists to the table, and I'll just do a real quick introduction. I've already introduced myself. I'm Bob Lanter. I'm the director of the California Workforce Association. And joining me today for the conversation is Abby Snee, Deputy Secretary of the California Labor Agency. We also are joined by Eric Rude, Chief of the California Division of Apprenticeship Standards. And we're joined by Marianne Pranke from the Verdugo Workforce Development Board. So we've got, you know, boots on the ground practitioner joining us for the conversation. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and say, hey, everybody, how are you? Welcome.
Good morning,
to the conference and the conversation.
Yeah.
Why do you think ECEPS is so exciting, and why has it caught on?
Well, I'll start. First and foremost, I came on board to head up the California's apprenticeship agency, and the first things that we were looking at was significant investments with the state, both through California apprenticeship initiatives with dollars to really expand opportunities of apprenticeship across the board in non-traditional areas. But as we've seen over the last 12, 14 months with this pandemic, we're having issues with childcare, and we really have an opportunity today to really develop a professional apprenticeship program in early childcare And my vision is to see that, that we create these pathways that really focuses on equity and inclusion, and then having the ability, because a lot of times the entry-level positions are low paying. As stated in other conferences this week for ECEPs, apprenticeship has wage progressions. It has, as skills are attained, it has a framework of work processes, on-the-job training aligned with classroom instruction. And what I would like to see is a pathway from entry level to even higher levels of the teaching profession. So it's actually a gateway into a professional teaching career.
It's funny, Eric, because I remember when I first met Randy Wolf, and when she was explaining this to me, and Marianne, you and I have been around the workforce block several times, right? So I've seen the shortages in this workforce, right? Childcare, after school care, early childcare. We've always struggled to fill these jobs, right? And so at first I remember thinking to myself, oh no, here we go again, right? another effort to try to fill these really critical positions. But what really, in my mind, what sets us apart, and you hit it, Eric, it's what we, I think, look for in the workforce world, right? There's a career pathway that can be articulated. Like, we can go out to the community and say, yeah, you'll start here, but here's how you progress to here. And it's mapped out. It can be shown. Now, I know it needs to be still built and expanded in a lot of areas, but it's tangible, like it exists already. And there's a pathway so that it's just not a job that starts and stops at early childhood education, but it's a job that can expand into higher wages. And then I think the other thing that's really important that really made me super excited is that there's an understanding that these jobs are really important in quality, and that the individuals who are working in these jobs are the individuals that we need to focus on when we talk about breaking cycles of inequities in the labor market. And so the whole thing just comes together for me. I'm super excited. Marianne, Abby?
Well, I was just going to piggyback on what Bob said, because as a workforce board, and I'm waiting in line for this to come to Glendale, and I'm really excited about it. But I think first and foremost, workforce boards overall really do want to make a difference in people's lives. And this is hitting the exact target audience that we want to hit, the low income folks, single parents. Many of them are women of color. This is exactly it. There's also, what's really important, it's that there's a combination of education and work-based learning and workforce. So you're really training people for a job, but you're allowing them, with work-based learning part of the apprenticeship, to easily transition into the workforce environment, because some of these folks may never have had a job before. And most importantly, that what we have learned in workforce is that yes, there are people that are happy in a production job, but then there's people who really want to make a difference. They really want to give back. They have received and want to give back. And this is a way to make a meaningful job for people where they feel that they're helping other people that were in their same situation, and they can really identify with those people. And that's critical to making sure that this is a true career pathway, because their heart is in it. It's not just a job. It is a career, and they're helping people.
Good point.
And Bob, I'll jump in, and still trying to get on video here. I just lost internet at wireless at a very bad moment. But I think this is pretty obvious, but should be stated. I think Randy just deserves so much credit for building a high capacity intermediary, with deep knowledge of the sector, and has built credibility over the.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Abby. That's really critical piece. And I'm really glad that you stated it, the role of the intermediary. And you said something that caught my ear, that I think maybe we need to start saying more and more of. Like, we talk about the role of the intermediary of, kind of bringing partners together, working with the Department of Industrial Relations in terms of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and then tracking all the OJT hours. But Abby, you said something I think is really important. A deep understanding of the industry, right? And in this case with ECE, I think it's super critical that it's really helpful. Abby, go ahead.
I think it's always helpful, and it's not just the knowledge, it is the relationships with training institutions, with employers, really being, just having the depth of knowledge and, again, credibility within the sector. I think that's why ECEPS has really caught on fire, and it would be great to figure out ways to replicate this model in multiple sectors in the state as well.
Yeah, so that's a great segue to what, I was thinking about. We've heard the governor for a number of years now talk about 500,000 apprentices by 2029. I think a goal that all of us probably here at this conversation agree with and support. But it seems to me, and just from my lens, that California has been slow to adopt and embrace non-traditional apprentices in non-traditional industries like the one we're talking about here. And Abby, you said it, ECE is a model, right? Could it be a model? Eric, I guess for you, since you're there at the Department of Industrial Relations, why do you think it's been slow to adopt? I guess is my first kind of obvious question. Non-traditional models.
Yeah, great question. As you know, apprenticeships are jobs, so that means is a lot of our role as a division of apprenticeship standards, which I have, a staff of 60. We have an $18 million budget. We created a new apprenticeship and workforce innovation unit to really sell the needs for a registered apprenticeship model for a workforce succession plan. And that includes bringing in new talent into companies. It includes upskilling incumbent workers into promotional opportunities with a lens of really creating equity within their local communities. And so apprenticeship, I always call it a do-si-do. It's a dance. These are not easy. From a state policy perspective, we don't want to do just one-off types of apprenticeships where it doesn't have scalability. We don't want programs that have to rely on state and federal dollars only. So we're looking at sustainability. And if you actually look at the successes of the registered apprenticeship model over California's 80 plus years of doing registered apprenticeship, what we've noticed is that employers have a skin in the game. And so for us is really providing the reasons why companies should look at participating in hiring apprentices and developing their talent. And it goes with other models across the world. You look at Switzerland, there's very little government funding in these programs, yet the employers know that there's going to be a return on investment. And that return on investment is anywhere from 11% to 25%, depending on the industry and what have you. So it's just for us is a paradigm shift, right? We've actually seen a substantial growth for California, right? So our numbers are so different than the rest of the country with the 5th largest economy. So the other challenge is that we have 14 economic regions, and they have their own culture, and really identifying who the decision makers are, and the local community-based organizations and nonprofits to really drive high road apprenticeship programs.
Yeah, I think Eric, you said a lot of very important stuff. I think in my experience as an intermediary and a program sponsor, a CWA is in a non-traditional apprenticeship program, registered apprenticeship program. There is some rolling up of the sleeves and kind of getting down and dirty and looking at knowledge, skills, and ability and how to kind of formalize the training program, which is really good work. It does take a little bit, but it's good work because it then professionalizes the occupation, it professionalizes the industry. And so I think as we go through these non-traditional occupations and we expand, the work is super important for the industry, but it's also really expensive work because, as you said, in other areas of Europe, a lot of that front end cost is borne by employers. And here, unfortunately, in the United States, I think there's a sense of, I want to see the results before I invest. So in fact, I've been asked to testify on the America's Jobs Plan. And one of the things I'm saying about apprenticeship is we need to invest in those startup costs in America, because those are significant. And I think it's a barrier to really expanding non-traditional apprenticeships. You know, things like the training, liability, employers is the other thing that you mentioned. And did we lose Eric? Oh. And so I
Bob,
want to ask Marianne. Oh, Abby, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to jump in and maybe as part of your testimony, going back to the intermediary role. I mean, where we always need funding that is often overlooked is for the glue. All the coordination, all the calls, all the planning, all the connecting, that is really critical to be funded. So talk about that too.
You know, Abby, it's funny. You know, when I first got into this work, I had a coworker, and she would call. Back then, we were the private industry councils, right? But she would say, "We're the gorilla glue." That's what we are. We're the gorilla glue. It is true. You know, the intermediary, it's the glue that really is expensive work, because it's bringing people to the table, keeping them at the table. So let's talk about that, Marianne. I heard you say in the conversation, you were saying, we're waiting in line. So when I hear that, and based on the conversation we were just talking to Abby and Eric about, are you playing the role of the intermediary, working with ECEPs, bringing the partners together? Tell us what you're doing down there in Verdugo and what waiting in line means.
Well, I will be working with Randy and bringing all the partners together. I have a unique role here in that I'm half workforce board and I'm half adult education on the Glendale Community College side. So I play two roles, which helps because it helps streamline the process of getting this started. So I have been working with Randy as they're launching this in Antelope Valley and helping her bring partners together over there. And I'm lurking so that I can learn from what they're doing over there. And I am in line, and Randy promises we'll get started very soon and bringing it to Glendale. Glendale Community College actually has one of the highest CalWORKs caseloads in the state. So bringing this here for our folks is going to be really important. And so many great points were made as to the reasons why we need something like this in Glendale. And I'm so excited to bring this here. You know, apprenticeships are kind of the opposite of what we're used to in workforce, because in workforce, we take individuals that need help getting jobs, and then we train them, and then we put them in the job. What an apprenticeship does is that it has a jobs first. It's almost backwards. It's like, here's the job, and now we're going to take people and train them for this job, instead of we're going to train people towards these particular jobs and let's hope that they get the job. And over here, it's the job is there and you're training them for that specific job. So it's kind of backwards, but at the same time, it's so exciting because the jobs are there and you're training them specifically for that job. So, so yes, I will be helping to bring in the partners, and also to make sure that there's funding available to bring it to Glendale. And we'll be using multiple sources of funding.
So Marianne, let's for those that might be listening that are that work for workforce boards or America's Job Centers, what programmatically are you guys doing as a workforce board? I mean, I know one thing we've talked about is you bringing partners to the table and kind of, you know, introducing the ECEPs program to them. But are you recruiting individuals? Are you case managing them? Can you tell us a little bit about programmatically what that looks like for the workforce board?
So we can, however, because these are specialized apprenticeships, and we're working not just with ECEPs, but also with Ellen over at the CCRC, Child Care Resource Center. They actually, and this is why it's so lucrative for workforce boards, is that they actually assist with and really take the lead in the outreach and recruitment. So they outreach and recruit with the participants, and we support, and then they also have the jobs. So really, what we're doing is the case management portion, the support, providing the supportive services, assisting with running the payroll, for example, when they're in the work-based learning, because it is paid. So we'll be doing that, and of course, any other support that is needed, we'll be doing that. But it's truly a team effort. And oftentimes what happens is when you bring a team together with workforce, workforce ends up doing all the work. They end up doing all of the outreach and recruitment. They have to bring in all of the jobs. They have to do the case management and provide all of the support. So they end up doing everything because, you know, our work is based on performance. And so we end up having to perform. And so it falls on us. But in this case, this is very different because you have all of the different partners with very specific roles and everybody's working together. So workforce is not carrying the load.
Yeah, Abby, Eric, what do you guys think of that? That's pretty cool.
It's amazing. And from a state policy perspective, we're realizing that for too long, apprenticeship was siloed from our workforce entities. And so, you know, as you know, the governor is actually proposing legislation that would create a new workforce department that would bring in the California Workforce Development Board with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, with the Employment Development Department's Workforce Services branch, which has the American Job Centers, as well as our employment training panel that provides funding for incumbent worker upskilling. And so from a state policy, we're starting to now incorporate apprenticeship programs that involve local workforce boards. And right now, I've been spending, and my team have been spending a lot of hours trying to utilize a state apprenticeship expansion and equity and inclusion grant from USDOL. And our strategy is to really look at local workforce boards for them to become apprenticeship sponsors and be able to provide opportunities throughout the state in order to really develop multi-employer, multi-occupation, public-private, and this early childcare is a critical area for us to do that.
And, you know, and I want to turn to state policy in a second and talk about high road and future of work, because we've got Abby here. But, you know, Eric, the one thing that I think is super critical about what you said is, you know, the expansion of these grants, the role that the workforce boards play is a role that we play, and I'm not a workforce board, the role that the workforce boards play regularly, right, Marianne, in different areas, not necessarily with these jobs, but in terms of when you have an initiative enrolling somebody and just providing the case management. I would think about TAA, you know, the Trade Adjustment Act services. You know, when TAA kicks in, workforce boards often do the case management because I think people overlook the importance of, you know, the support services, the tracking, the reporting. And I think, you know, so for those of you who are workforce boards out there, this isn't a new role for you, but it's a great role because, as Marianne said, lucrative is a nice word because the apprenticeship programs where people are actually earning while they learn, as a workforce board, you can take your placements and your wage progressions right alongside them earning and learning. So it meets your performance measures while you're really helping people. And, you know, the other thing that strikes me is so many people come into the career centers looking for work. I mean, they don't come looking for training. They just, I mean, rarely have I met somebody, I mean, dislocated workers maybe, right, but they come in because they need a job. Now, training is a path to a better job, and training is your passport to a higher career. And so this is, like you said, we can get them the job and they can also build their career at the same time. So it works out really well. Abby, let's talk about, you know, high road framework and these jobs. I know there's a concern that these jobs are low wage jobs, low paying jobs. And you know, do these jobs fit in the high road framework in your opinion? And if so, where? And then maybe all of us can talk about whether we think they fit in the high road, you know, whether these are high road jobs or not. Abby?
Sure. And I think it's useful to talk about the core principles of high road training partnerships, you know, and and the ECEPS model certainly has some of the core elements, as we've talked about, working as an industry sector intermediary, having multiple employers, working across the sector, with a very strong equity lens. The piece that is challenging, but is really important, and I want to believe we can address, is the job quality piece. And when we look at metrics of job quality, I think it's important, especially when we're talking about early childhood, to really focus on wages, on benefits, on career mobility, on reliable hours. And I mean, the wages are problematic, which in no way, casts any aspersion or criticism on how critical these roles are for a well-functioning society. And that's certainly a lesson that we've seen in the last year of COVID, but, and I've certainly spent my career in sector-based training and moving people up, and always want to believe that career advancement is a pathway out of poverty. And that's hard to do. I think apprenticeship is a great tool for doing it, but when we talk about the glue and the need for supports for somebody to be working full-time, to have kids, to have broadband at home, to do studying at home, in courses that are available when someone's not working, is challenging. And we have to look at the sector, and we have to look at job quality and wages within the sector, which take some, bold policy solutions that we haven't quite figured out at the state as a country. I think many of us are really heartened when, President Biden presents an infrastructure package, and I think the details will come in the second one, that really looks at care as a critical infrastructure. And again, we've learned that in the last year. Families cannot work if their kids aren't in high quality care, and that high quality care should be acknowledged and rewarded as a quality job. And so that gets into reimbursements, that gets into credentialing, and those are challenging. So, I think there is the potential to build job quality here, and for, the ECEPS model to be, brought into a high road framework.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great way, Abby. I like the way you're thinking about job quality, not just being wages. I mean, I think we can all think of jobs that pay well that are probably not good quality jobs, right? And vice versa. So it's not all in just wages. I mean, these jobs have huge impact, as you said, Abby, on society. I was just speaking to one of a speaker at one of our upcoming conferences, and she's one of the premier authors on equity for females. And she told me that, the COVID pandemic may have put female equity back almost 10 years, because
Sure.
Women, when there's no childcare, women are often the ones that stay home while men continue to earn. And the more women stay home to take care of children, the less earnings, the earnings shrink, right? And that sets them back in the marketplace. So childcare is critical. And these jobs have, I think you mentioned impact, right? The impact of this workforce goes way beyond, and unfortunately doesn't equate to wages. Eric, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah,
they should.
Yeah, and just I know you want to call on Eric, but just before we go there, the impact of the pandemic on women's employment has been profound, in terms of the numbers of women dropping out of the labor market, as well as the sectors which experience the highest job loss have tended to be sectors that employ large numbers of women: service jobs, hospitality, leisure, and the impact on family earnings is huge. On future employment. And let's also add in there retirement security, because time out of the labor market really affects, this has been a huge challenge for women historically. Their future, when they're not paying into Social Security, it has an impact on their future retirement security.
Yeah, and hey, Abby, you guys live a lot longer than us, so you need your retirement security.
Right.
I mean, I think that's true. I think that's, no, but I think that's true. I mean, everything you say, Abby, is absolutely true. And that's why I think it's critical for industries like this. Like, what can we do to really, prop it up and professionalize it? Because the impact is huge.
Yeah.
Eric, you want to add to that?
I would just add, first and foremost, I mean, the registered apprenticeship model also selling to employers. When you think of apprenticeship, unfortunately, you think building, construction trades, and firefighting, and in these government jobs. And so, in order for us to do better, and one of the biggest challenges I have is to get gender equality right into registered apprenticeship programs. And there was a lot of state legislation that we had to overcome some barriers. So to your point on your earlier question about, it seems like it's a slow go. It is in some ways, because we actually had to create a new interagency advisory committee on apprenticeship that focuses on non-traditional. And that took, that was signed as an urgency bill back in September of 2018. And so, which gave us a little bit of flexibility within the labor code to look at apprenticeship differently than a time-based construction model. And so within state law, we developed looking at programs, how do we deliver classroom instruction? Because if you're a single mom, you can't go to school during the hours of 8 and 5. So really looking at flexibility, creating an online California community college system where you can really be able to take the classroom related instruction on the time of the actual apprentice. And so a lot of this is really kind of just changing the paradigms of how we structure apprenticeship, how we may need to front load related and supplemental instruction in the front before the 2,000 hours of on-the-job training. So this is, of course, with creating this new interagency advisory committee, we're also asking industry experts, labor, as well as education and with practitioners to really develop what are the minimum industry training criteria that's needed to create a quality framework. And so with everything that's there, we're really looking at ways, how do we remove the barriers so that we can really affect those who've been left behind, the financial divide, right? And a lot of it's in our big cities where the cost of living is through the roofs. And unfortunately, mostly, people of color, women of color are mostly adversely impacted. So being able to provide that gateway or that access point is critical as we develop early care and educational pathways as we move forward.
I was just going to say, and I know Eric and his team think all the time about increasing the participation of women in traditional apprenticeships, which has been a challenge, continues to be a challenge. We need role models, we need mentors, we need a critical mass of women to attract more women. It's kind of interesting that in early childhood, we've got the inverse of that, where it is a women-dominated occupation, and no accident that it is, underinvested in, and these are underpaid roles.
Right. I think, looking at, I just want to say before we get off the topic of high road, I think, the high road is becoming, is building a brand. People want, your industry, you want to be a high road industry. If you're a training provider, if you're a service provider, you want to be able to participate in high road. They're seeing the money going to high road. And I know, talking to people at ECEPs, they want to be high road. But the thing is that, I don't know how I think it's important, Abby and Eric and folks who work with the state, to include as to really allow for high road, that thought process as you open the conversation with Abby, the pinnacles of high road, right, to be expanded into all industries. Because otherwise you're going to have people kind of turn away from industries that they think are not high road. And I think that's the danger of it.
Well, those are really hard questions and hard debates, Bob.
Mhm.
And, I think the state is making some commitments around where we invest our dollars. And not all industries are high road, and not all jobs are high road. And, I think, part of the principles behind high road are investing in those industries where, there's good job quality to begin with, or, there's a very intention, intention around, making jobs better. And I think that potential could be there in early childhood. Not easy, but certainly through policy solutions. And also, perhaps selecting, and I know when I was working in direct service at JVS in San Francisco, and we ran early childhood training, just being selective. I mean, it's not always easy to do this, but those employers that do pay more and that offer better quality jobs, so I think that's something we can do. And also looking at where there are early childhood jobs within the K through 12 system, that tend to pay better and, could create pathways into other roles in education. So I think we do have options, but, I think being firm to principles around what does constitute job quality and high road, we don't want to let go of. I know at some point you wanted to talk about the future of work commission and the recommendations, and one of the 5 core recommendations is ending working poverty. And that is just so critical as we build towards an equitable recovery, as we build towards an equitable future. And the commission called out care, both early care for children and long-term care for elderly, as one of the sectors to focus on. So I think all eyes are and should be on really improving the nature of work in this sector. Nobody should work and be poor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I do want to talk about workforce boards. I'm checking on our time, but since we mentioned the Future Work Commission, I'd like to stay on state policy just if we can, and just kind of take care of that for a second, because I think this is a really good conversation, and it's an interesting conversation. And I agree with you. Like, if we're going to break cycles of inequity, we've got to push the labor markets, and we've got to hold people accountable, right? You mentioned the lack of women in the trades. We need to hold the trades accountable to include more women in the trades, right? That's just what we have to do. So then how do we hold this industry accountable for increasing wages? Is there a way? I just don't know. Like, in my experience, I don't know how that is done. I don't know if we subsidize wages as a government, universal basic income. I don't know if we say, Abby, look, we'll fund programs that only pay a certain wage. As you said, choose the employers wisely. So I just want to get everybody's thoughts on how we promote and encourage job quality. That's a good way I would say that.
Yeah. Yeah, no easy answers in this sector. And I think all the reasons that, we've been talking about the impact of this sector and how crucial it is, just needs to, change expectations about how these jobs ought to be valued and how they ought to be paid. And, again, if there were easy answers, I think we would have figured this out a while ago. But there could be multiple policy solutions, including looking at state reimbursement for, which is a heavy, and federal reimbursement for early childhood education. I mean, there are multiple levers for change, and this work is not easy, and we're going to have to explore those multiple levers, right?
Yeah, and that's the push and pull, right, as well. I mean, because you're a lot of the folks that desperately need the child care can't afford,
right. There's a squeeze.
There's a squeeze there. So from a state policy perspective, we need to get that right, to be able to, and as Abby said, to end working poverty. And so and within our state, it's so dynamic. Whether you're a coastal city, which with a cost of living where if you're making $120,000, you're living in poverty a year, versus our rural parts of the state, right, where you just have opportunities for careers and really how we move forward as from a state and federal perspective. So.
Yeah. And I think, Abby, I don't know exactly, but I've been thinking about high road a lot. And I think somewhere in that definition of job quality or impact is where we can start defining industries like ECEPs a little differently, where it's just not wages, or family sustaining wages, because, at the beginning of the career pathway, they're not going to make family sustaining wages, but maybe it's kind of impact, or I don't really know, but I feel like that's where maybe there might be some solution.
Well, another one of the future work recommendations is around improving improving job quality in California, making California a state that has more high quality jobs, that actually sets a metric around kind of increasing the percentage of higher quality jobs in terms of total job growth. And a starting point for that is developing something like a job quality index, that actually does what you're talking about. And there's some work that's been done. The Aspen Institute is a great source of thought leadership around measuring job quality, has a whole library of different metrics and systems. And, so there may be some legislation around measuring job quality. There may be other approaches, but, and when the commission talked about this, they really talked about a job quality scorecard that could be one of the ways that California reports on its economic growth, not just on total growth, but on the growth of quality jobs. And interestingly, one of the studies the commission looked at was some surveying that the Gallup organization did around how workers themselves perceive job quality and the factors that influence that, and how they're treated at work, the quality of supervision, their level of engagement is certainly important to workers in the same ways, and this was pre-economic downturn and COVID, but very important in addition to wages and benefits and opportunities for career advancement and reliable scheduling. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, I think, factors that go into that, right? That's good. I like the job quality index. I think that can open up a lot of avenues for folks. Marianne, are you with us? Because I see your video.
I think so. I think my camera the video just stopped working, so I'm getting tech support on that. But I do want to jump in and say that I understand job quality. I understand high road, but maybe we need to look at it from the individual perspective, because it may not be a high road in the way that we think of it, but for some of these individuals, it's definitely high road for them, especially if they've never had a job before. We got to start somewhere. If we're only going to be looking at specific jobs and not allowing or not focusing on the jobs that are the first step for people, then we may be missing a lot of opportunities to serving the people that are the most underserved. And so we have to start somewhere. They have to start somewhere. And if they've never had a job before, and I'm thinking of how I'm going to explain this to our workforce board when they see that these are lower paying jobs, is this is what I would tell them, is that we've got to start somewhere. And we're taking people who are may never have had a job before, are not earning income now, or are receiving public assistance, and we're going to turn them into taxpayers. And this combines workforce and education, which is so important in order for them to build from that. But they've got to start somewhere.
Right. And Marianne, I think that's a great segue to discuss workforce development boards and how they operate and work. But I think it's really critical. I mean, you mentioned some points in my opinion that are really critical. If if your workforce board sees this as a low wage dead end job, and policymakers are calling, say workforce boards do nothing but churn workers, then why would they enter into a partnership like this, right? Because that's what they're being told that they do, and they don't want to do that. So I think where you hit something that really strikes is the movement and progression of people from zero wages to some wages, and then from some wages to family sustaining wages, and then from family sustaining wages to high wage careers. And when we look at the demographics of the people coming into the Career Center system, it's people who, for the most part, aren't prepared just yet without some education to connect to more mainstream education and apprenticeship programs. So I think it's really critical that that's why I'm hitting the definition of high road so key here, because we've got to look at things differently, or Marianne, we might miss, as you said, key components of our society. And I want to make sure that workforce board, just like everybody else, knows that these are quality jobs. Not all of them are quality, just like in any industry, but there are quality jobs to be had, and there are careers here. And I think that career pathway, the lattice, when I look at some of the data analytics that ECEPS has on the cost of the workforce crisis, it's clearly impactful in this industry. Does that make sense, Marianne?
It really does. And Bob, I'm thinking that what's really going to be important is that we share the success stories with our board, with the state, so that they see who it is that we're serving and where they are, throughout the progress of the apprenticeship, so that they can see their progress, and they'll see that we're serving the people that we're supposed to be serving. And ultimately, overall, that is what workforce boards want to do. They do want to make a difference. They do want to take the people that are underserved, and that have been overlooked. And, you and I have had these conversations. If we're just going to pick the people that we can get into these high paying jobs and into these, technical skills, then we're going to be missing an entire population that really needs us. We might as well pack up and go home, because we're never going to hit those folks. We're never going to be able to serve those folks if that we only concentrate on that. We have to start somewhere. And not only that, but I know we're talking about education, providing them with the skills to do the job, but also in Glendale, because we have such a high immigrant population, immigrant asylees, refugees, we're going to have to integrate ESL as well. And we've been doing that with other apprenticeships and career pathways, and we're going to do that. So this is definitely going to allow us to serve a population, one of our target populations. Also, a misconception from the workforce board side is that we tie everything to the state negotiated performance measures. But we also have discretionary dollars, which are not tied to state negotiated performance measures. That allows us to take a chance on this. And really, the state and the state workforce board have been very flexible and been trying to encourage us, take those calculated risks, take those intelligent risks, serve these folks, make a difference, see what you can do. And if you bomb, it's okay. We just don't like to bomb, but still, it allows us to take those risks. And again, that's another selling point for our workforce board, is that this is a pilot. We're running this. These are discretionary dollars. We can do this, and look at what the benefits might be.
That's very good, Marianne. I would just add also, like for us, we've done a lot of work in other sectors that really involve English language learners, and looking at really partnering with with Tim Rainey and the folks over at the California Workforce Development Board with one program that comes to mind is Unite Here, Local 11 down in Los Angeles, in how they have a worker's voice. Again, these are low wages, but there's some benefits that are tied to for workers that are working as hotel both in the front of cleaning rooms, room attendants, but also on the back end in performing work as chefs and what have you. So just because it is low wages doesn't mean that we can't build something to really address getting folks that are the most vulnerable into a career pathway. The other thing that happened with Assembly Bill 235, we created a registered pre-apprenticeship program because a lot of times individuals are not ready to just jump into a registered apprenticeship program. So we're providing the soft skills, the ability to how to interview and how to in some of our pre-apprenticeships, they're providing OSHA 10 training, or they're providing first aid and CPR, so they have their certifications up front as they're entering into the workforce. And in the early childcare space, we may look at other states and what they're doing well. I know just with discussions I've had with Randy, just looking at, there in other states, there's actually teaching credentials that are for younger populations, K through 4, right? And looking at how do we really move the needle, right? Not just in the early childcare, but that this is truly a pathway that can lead to your AA, leads to your bachelor's of arts, and you really become a true profession. And we can start at the pre-apprenticeships, but work our way up. So.
Right. Hey, so I just thought of something, and if it's branded, I'll take my royalties. But we have high road kitchens. Why don't we have high road childcare? I mean, it's the same concept as what's going on with Unite Here. Yeah. In terms of, bringing the stakeholders, professionalizing industry, creating quality jobs, holding employers accountable.
Yeah. And what's beautiful, real quick, what's beautiful about that is we have workers that go to multiple employers, right? So sometimes if it's to get the on-the-job training, they might be at Staples centers in downtown Los Angeles, and then they're only needed for a couple hours there, but then they say, oh, but the Marriott right next door needs it, and so they're able to get exposure with multiple employers. The other thing with intermediary type of apprenticeships is it allows small employers and mid-sized employers to be able to participate, so they don't have to bear the costs of a registered apprentice to that. So that's one of the reasons why we are really looking at a regional intermediary approach in building to the 500,000 goal.
And just Abby? Back to your analogy with high road kitchens, I mean, the concept of high road in restaurants has called for restaurant owners to actually sign a pledge. That has certain criteria for becoming a high road employer in a high road restaurant, and applying that to the early childhood sector could be something really great to look at.
Yeah, I think so let's talk about these workforce boards some more. So there's always confusion. I know that, I don't know if you know Tim Aldinger. He's with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. He and I one time did a workshop at a conference, was everything you wanted to know about community colleges and afraid to ask. And then we did later on the next hour, everything you want to know about workforce boards and we're afraid to ask. And it was crazy, the questions we got. And one of the questions we got about workforce boards was, just how are they configured? Why are they so different? One is called, San Joaquin WorkNet, and then I'm here in Southern California, it's WorkSource Center. And so why is it like that? And it's the beauty and the bane of the workforce system is that it's locally defined, the investments are local. But the challenge with that is that it's not very systemic, right? It's hard to see how it's configured equally across the system. And so how are they configured? Well, they're configured around kind of units of government is the easiest way to think about them. Either county supervisors or mayors if you have big cities. But in the cases where you don't have a lot of population, like in counties that are like Alpine County, for example, you wouldn't have enough population for one county to be its own board. So then you have joint powers between county supervisors. So you'll have consortia like we have in the Mother Lode or in Golden Sierra or up in the NorTec region, where there are 13 counties. So it really kind of, it's historic in some ways because, which is never good in my opinion with legislation, that, you know, if you've been a workforce board for years, when WIOA came into being, you could remain being a workforce board as long as you performed well. So that's why there's 45, and that's why they don't overlay neatly into county jurisdictions. That's why they cross community college jurisdictions. And that's why it's kind of messy when it comes to who do I talk to, right? If I'm in Reading, you're going to talk to a board that controls 13 counties, not controls, but their jurisdiction is 13 counties. But if you're in Verdugo, Marianne, you cover how many cities?
3 cities.
But you work with 6 other workforce boards to cover a county.
Correct.
So that's how it's configured. I don't know if there's any, I don't think that answers any questions, except, you know, if you want to find out where your local workforce board is, you can either go to the CWDB, that's www.cwdb.ca.gov, the California Workforce Development Board, just Google that. Or you can go to CWA, California Workforce Association, on our website, and we have a link on our main page that will allow you to put your zip code in and take you to the local board. But Marianne, I have heard you talk a lot about performance, and I know in your past, you know, you've been very involved in workforce boards' performance and quality. Can you talk a little bit about why apprenticeship model is good for workforce boards performance, and why ECE in particular is good? You were just talking about the harder to serve, but how that actually can benefit performance. So I'm talking about the statistical adjustment model. Can you talk a little bit about those two things for us?
Sure. So when it comes to the formula funding that we receive, those are, we have the state negotiated performance measures that need to be met, which is a good thing because it makes sure that we are accountable for the tax dollars that we use, and that we're actually putting people to work and putting people into jobs that they will stay at. So that's the good thing. However, it does kind of drive the risk factor that workforce boards take when it comes to enrolling and placing. However, the statistical adjustment model, what it does is it takes a look at the end of the year, it takes a look at who you have served. So you may have specific negotiated performance measures at the beginning of your program year. And then at the end, it takes a look at, did you serve those underserved populations? Did you serve people with multiple barriers? Did you serve the English language learners, people with disabilities, veterans, reentry, those folks? If you did, then your performance measures are actually adjusted and they're lowered if you show that you're serving those folks. So an apprenticeship like this that's targeting that population will actually help you. And so it will adjust your performance so it actually lowers them. And so you don't have to worry about as much about not meeting your performance because they're going to be adjusted. So, and because Verdugo is one that has served traditionally, we serve people with intellectual disabilities, we serve English language learners, high population of both, and reentry and veterans. Our adjustment model at the end of the year typically will lower our performance. And ultimately, what we, you know, our philosophy, and it starts at the top, it starts with our executive director, is we need to serve the people that we're here and supposed to be serving. And the performance will come, and it always has. We've never missed our performance measures, even though we serve all of these folks. But we're certainly making a difference in our community, and that's most important.
I think, Marianne, you and I went to the same school of workforce development because I was trained the exact same words, like serve the community, performance will come. Right. And I never, you know, I ran a workforce board for 7 years. I never worried about performance. And for 7 years, we made performance. I mean, Abby, you probably heard the same thing too, because you worked for workforce, as a provider for Workforce Board for many years, right?
A CBO partner.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, so, you serve the community and your performance does actually, I mean, it's not like you can just not worry about it, but if you do the right work, then you typically perform. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, I think we all have to be very deliberate around the outcomes that we want from the services that we provide and the programs that we set up, and run those programs to meet those outcomes, measure those outcomes, and then learn from them. So I have never been a fan of not worrying about performance, and I think that is part of serving the community, because we owe the community the, quality programs and the, continuous learning about programs so that we can get people into good jobs, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you, Abby. And I often heard the criticism that workforce boards aren't interested in programs like ECE. And I know Randy has asked me, is that a fair criticism? And I think we just heard Marianne even say, I've got to sell this to my workforce board. Yes, that's a fair criticism. But I think, in my experience, what makes a workforce board interested in a program like this is exactly what Abby said, which is they can then come back to the community when performance is tracked and say, not only did we, meet performance in terms of our data, but we made impact based, on a return on investment. And in my opinion, in my experience, that's where I think the community really gets excited about a workforce board, is when they return impact back to the community, and I think if you go ahead, Rabbi.
Well, I don't want to take us off track, but I think when you talk about impact and we stay within early childhood, some of the greatest impact has been taking young moms whose kids are in Head Start or other child care centers and doing a mom to teacher conversion, right? Really tapping the skills that young mothers have developed, their own ambitions, which may have been thwarted, by a whole host of factors having to do with equity and life circumstances. And, in some ways, what a great gig to be able to have a job and be at the same place where your kid is all day, right? Again, we just have to work at making these better jobs and creating pathways, for the sector, and creating individual pathways for the individual.
Yeah, no, Abby, that's a great way to say it. And I really think that if you're out there and you're thinking about going to your workforce board, or if you're a workforce board person, you're thinking about going to your community college or ECEPs, I think you really need to think of the terms of impact, about these types of jobs. And then really dive in head first, because these are critical jobs to the individuals who are working in them. They're critical jobs to our communities, our economy, our society. And we really need to lift this industry up and work together to solve some of the challenges we've been talking about over the last hour. And I think, before we bring this conversation to a close, I want to make sure that we are all working together, and I know we are, to provide the adequate funding. We've heard, in the streets of California that, hey, there's been a windfall. You're going to, the American Rescue Plan's kicking in. We've got the America's Job Plan behind it. Abby, Eric, any hints or thoughts about possible resources coming for apprenticeship programs or expansion of ECEPs, or anything to that effect?
Definitely. One of the
Eric, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, what I would say, one of the big issues right now in DC is the reauthorization of the National Apprenticeship Act. And really looking at reimagining an apprenticeship for the first time since 1937. And within that, looking at a significant investment in the federal apprenticeship system, but not just the federal apprenticeship system, but for state apprenticeship agencies like the Division of Apprenticeship Standards. And part of this grant exercise that we've been working on the last couple of weeks my bigger goal is to create that infrastructure, because it's really is aligning what my colleagues in other states would call the WIOA-ization of apprenticeship. And a lot of states don't have, because we have a state apprenticeship system that feeds into the federal Rapids apprenticeship database, but apprenticeship agencies across the country do not have generally access to the workforce, federal workforce system in WIPs. And so really looking at how we create the ability for sizable investment. We're talking investments similar to WIOA on the apprenticeship side with this reauthorization of the National Apprenticeship Act. And so we just have to be ready. And in addition to that, we have a lot of California folks that are going back to Washington, D.C., as well as a very good friend to the state of California, Susie Levine, who was a former ambassador to Switzerland and worked closely with Governor Inslee in the state of Washington, heading up the Employment and Training Administration. So everything's starting to line up in such a way that we really need to be intentional on how we can really create these pathways in early care and educational pathways as we move forward. And so this is definitely, as Abby would say, part of the care that we do need. We have to, as policymakers, have to do it right.
Marianne, Abby, last words?
Well, just to say that we're working hard with our partners in the state to generate some state support as well. Right. Stay tuned.
And I think overall workforce boards, and Bob, you can jump in as well. I think overall workforce boards are trying to find ways to partner with apprenticeships. I know that was one area, I've been in the business for over 30 years, and that was one area that I was probably the least knowledgeable about. It always seemed like a mirage, like it's there and you get there and you try to get there, but then, it seems to vanish. But this is definitely an opportunity for us to partner. It's an emphasis in our state workforce plan. It's an emphasis in everything from AJCC certification to grants. So the opportunities are there, and this is a viable opportunity that we can take advantage of and truly partner with apprenticeships.
Right. I agree. And I would just leave it at, once you take a look at the role of an intermediary, of a program sponsor, whether it's through ECEPs, which we're talking about today, or other non-traditional apprenticeship programs, Marianne, it's the role workforce boards have been playing for many, many years. And what it can do to help performance is really incredible. So they should take a look at that. And so I want to thank my folks for joining us in the conversation, Abby, Eric, Marianne. I always enjoy our conversations. I learned so much from all of you. I really appreciate your time this morning. I thought it was fantastic. And thanks everybody for listening to us. We hope you enjoyed it as well. And now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Randy Wolf. Randy, welcome.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I knew there was a reason we saved this discussion till the end. And I think everyone who's listening, and we've got about 80 people on the line, so this is fantastic, can see why this was important to do at the end. That's number one. Number two, I also knew there was a reason I didn't plan in advance exactly how to use this last session, because I needed to hear your conversations to know what needed to be added or clarified or whatever. So I've got notes. I've got very spontaneous notes, but let me run through this. The first is, I want to acknowledge, if ever there was proof of when we talk about everything's about relationships, this panel demonstrated it, because I think it's fair to say that over the last 5-6 years, the relationships that I've developed with everybody on this panel is part of why we've had this conversation. And of course, what's been great about that, and for me, it gave me the chance to have this amazing learning curve. On the other hand, it needs to be not only me. And so clearly, I'm happy to play the role I'm playing, and I'm also happy to open the stage, open the doors and make it wider so that there's even more relationships and understanding and conversations at this level with this kind of impact and potential. The second thing I want to say is, you know, in a cynical moment, people who are fighting for change will say, well, that's just the system and you can't fight the system. And in a good moment, you go, well, that's why systems change is called systems change. And I want to underscore, before I see any of the more specific comments, what we're talking about at this conference and in the whole world of early childhood workforce development in California and across the country is fundamental systems change, not just in the workforce system, not just in the education system, in state budgeting, in state priorities, in economic priorities, in social priorities. You know, I'm hesitant to make this particular analogy because of what's going on right now in the country, but it's an apt analogy. All the discussions around civil rights and reforming, you know, the prison system, you know, all that is so important, but it's not about fixing this policy or that policy. It's challenging the very way we think about these issues and the way this society has functioned, and to challenge the way the ECE profession has been trivialized and undervalued and underpaid requires system change, thought change, perspective change, and nothing less than that is really going to get us where we need to go. That's the big picture. Let me address a whole range of things that were said, and if I misquote you or misstate you, I apologize. That's not my intention. I really want to do this in the spirit of clarifying, because it's so rare to have this level of conversation. And maybe next time we'll do this where I'm actually part of it. It would be interesting to see how that would go. The first thing I want to just mention is words matter. And I really think we have to stop using the words job quality, or rather quality jobs, to be defined so heavily on earning potential. It's a reflection of the capitalist system that we operate in, but it's also such a misnomer, because so much of job quality has nothing to do with money. And so I understand why we talk about quality jobs, but it is a mistake and it's a dead end, and it leaves so many people out of the equation. So I want to underscore that. The second thing, and Abby knows, Abby and I have had this conversation well, there's two things. When Abby talks about how we have to figure out ways to make the best paying jobs in ECE, you know, available to the workers, I want to say two things about that. One is, right now in this state, those of you who were here at the beginning of the conference know that one of the priorities I held out, policy priorities, is to get an ECE teaching credential. And this is one of the reasons why. One of the fastest growing, best paying, most widely recognized sectors of the ECE workforce is transitional kindergarten. And ECE workers can't take those jobs because it requires you have a K-8 multiple subjects credential. And someone who wants to commit their life to working in early childhood does not need nor want to take the time to get a credential that certifies them up to 8th grade. That is a policy issue we have to fix, and it's fixable. So that's one thing. On the other hand, there's a lot in what you all said, and it's interesting because it came up in this morning's conversation about community colleges as well. There's two things about this thing about jobs. On the one hand, it's true. ECE has a career trajectory. I started out as an assistant teacher in a preschool classroom about, I don't know, 40 years ago, maybe more than 40 years ago. There's clearly a career pathway, and it's fine and it's good. And it's okay that in some ways ECE serves as an on-ramp to pathways that are more lucrative and also more sort of influential in terms of policy. But that's only half the story. You should be able to decide that you love working with 2-year-olds and you want to work with 2-year-olds for the rest of your career. You should have that option, and it should not mean you're consigned to a life of poverty, any more than if you decide you want to work in a bank for the rest of your life and you want to be a teller. You're not interested in becoming a manager, or more specifically, you want to teach 5th grade, you want to teach high school, you want to teach college. Somebody should have the option of working in any sphere of early care and education and not have to sacrifice wages. These are important jobs with huge impacts on society for the families we work with, but also for the young children, their reading scores, their social emotional development, and all the rest. Until we do both sides of that, strengthen the career pathways, but also make it possible to take any job you want and get paid well, good working conditions, all the job security you expect if you were a teacher or you were in most well-paid nonprofits, private sectors. Let's see. I want to challenge, and I really challenge Bob, but you said two things I wanted to challenge, and you and I can talk more about this later. If I got it right, you said something about what you were trying to say was, it's ridiculous that there's so few women in the trades and we have to hold the trades responsible for that. I think I understand your sentiment. I think it's a wrong conclusion. It may just be the fact that women aren't all that interested in working in the trades. Like, we have to stop assuming that this male-dominated field that has not been open to women and it's not been easy for women, therefore that problem is make that more appealing. Women have found jobs, women work, a huge percentage of women, even with young children, work. The issue is not for the trades to single-handedly address that. The issue is for apprenticeships to embrace the fields that women are in. And so I agree with your goal, but I wanted to sort of tweak that way of stating it. And the other thing is, when you said that we need to hold the industry accountable for the wages, that's impossible. Early care and education, by and large, is in the nonprofit sector. We don't hold the K-12 school system accountable for the wages, except to the extent that it's a union organized field, so they fight for wages. But we don't go to an individual middle school and say, wait a minute, your teachers aren't being, and in fact, I'll even go a step further. If we did hold schools accountable, we wouldn't be funding the K-12 system through property taxes, which we know results in unintended consequences of huge inequity in terms of how teachers are paid where they work. But bringing it back to ECE, until this field is publicly funded the way schools are, we can't hold them accountable. When you're running a nonprofit and you get a grant from the state through the Child Development Planning Grant, I always get the name of that thing wrong. You're given a certain amount of money and you got a scope of work. You don't have the option of going out and making profit to improve things. And so it's not that we don't want to be accountable, but it's not a question of we should hold this industry accountable the way we hold other industries. Once you start talking about the private sector, it's just a whole different world. And once you start talking about non-organized industries, which is another issue in terms of unions and the power that comes with a union, which we also talked about the other day. And likewise, so that was what I wanted to challenge Bob on. We'll have a conversation offline about that. But the other thing is, it's sort of adjoining that is, there was a lot of comments that were made in this conversation. And again, I understand the intent. And obviously, it's not for you all to be experts on our field. That's why it's important that we have these relationships. That's why it's important that we have these conversations. But you are underestimating the extent to which this already is a profession with standards, a profession with competencies, a profession with a national, not only one, a whole bunch of national professional organizations. It is not for lack of professionalism it's not the lack of professionalism that has held this industry back. That's almost like an excuse. And beyond that, almost every state in the country has what we call quality rating and improvement systems, where every center is rated on a 5-point scale or a 3-point scale, the way restaurants are rated. That's a different problem as well, because restaurants, you're rating the quality of food, and childcare centers, you're rating the quality of really important personal care. So even whether that model is applicable to human beings is another question. But my point is, I want you and the workforce world to understand we have those structures. That's not the problem. The problem is you can't keep expecting more without paying. It defies the rules of economics. There's a huge demand for these jobs, and it doesn't result in better pay. And And so this is one of the reasons, and I see Abby's comment, this is one of the reasons why we need a credential, so that we can't be treated like second-class citizens in the K, or the birth to cradle to career education, continuum. And so we acknowledge the level of professionalism that's out there right now. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. We have a couple minutes. I was going to open this up for people to give final thoughts about the conference, but this seems really important. So let me ask if any or all of the four of you want to make any final comments so that I don't get the last word in an unfair kind of way. Bob, you want to ask the question you just put in the thing and talk about it?
Hey, Randy. Yes, I agree with what your challenge to me. I completely agree with the way you couch things. So no need to follow up with the conversation. I think I'm on the same page with you there. The thing, though, the question is, if we're not holding employers accountable for wages and better jobs, then should we hold the government accountable for better subsidies?
Well, or better state funding in general. Again, subsidies is a temporary fix, right? And subsidies fight over a small pot and who's going to get it. And also the problem with subsidies is, Head Start, first of all, Head Start has never been fully funded. As far as I know, no more than 50% of the children who are qualified for Head Start have ever received Head Start. So even there that, it's like subsidies would be a start. But the idea that it's not universal comes at a cost. Once you say it's, well, this, once you say it's a, what's that word?
Formula?
No, a public subsidy, an entitlement, then there's a stigma, right? It has to be that the value of education and care from birth or prenatally really on is valued. Therefore, it has to be part of a state government budget, part of a federal government budget. It can't be some kind of little thing that everybody has to fight over the scraps.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense to me. Yeah. You have questions in the chat box.
Oh, it's a long question. Wait, I think it's a comment more than a question. Abby, did you want to say anything further? And I hope I didn't sound screaming and yelling at you guys. I was just nervous because I hadn't.
Well, part of why you're so effective, Randy, is that you're so passionate and you're just such an effective, incredibly informed leader in this field. And I just couldn't agree more about how important early childhood is. And I think one conversation we didn't really dig into today, perhaps you talked about it earlier in the conference, is almost the definitions and the continuum around early care and early childhood education. And clearly we want to look at some of those definitions as opportunities for systems change and credentialing and funding.
Yeah, exactly. And so that we end on a really uplifting note, let me say this, so that people don't get the wrong impression. I think it's incredibly hopeful that we had this conversation today. I think it's incredibly hopeful that the issues that came up, at least for me and some of my friends who've been texting me, these are important issues and this conversation needs to happen. That's how we make real change. And that's progress, because 7 years ago, we wouldn't have had this conversation. 7 years ago, I don't think, Abby, that early childhood would be essential in the future of work report as it is, right? Or in the infrastructure plan that Biden's putting out, and on and on and on. So we're making big progress. And this is the soup we're in. We're fighting these fights. Yay. And I wanted, so the particularly uplifting thing, what we saw happen, and Marianne was such a vital piece of this puzzle. The fact that we were able to get money, or we're waiting now to hear about it, from the LA County Workforce Development Board through the WEDAX, that's a LA workforce thing, to offset the cost of home visitor apprenticeship wages was a miracle. And assuming we get that money, which they pretty much invited the proposal, so I assume we're going to get this money, it opens this door, right? It cracks something really important. Then we can start saying to other workforce boards, here's what we proved in LA, right? Charles, the work he does in Inland Empire, where he's basically saying to all his workforce boards, for working with early childhood, we're bringing in ECEPs. These are some of the successes where we have actually made progress, and it takes work and it takes relationship building and it takes a lot of sort of re-educating people because there's so many myths and misunderstandings about early childhood. But that's also the good news because we're having those conversations. So on that uplifting note, I want to close this conference. I want to thank everybody who has participated. I knew this was going to be a good conference, but this conference really went beyond my imagination. Every panel, the questions that came from participants, the spirit, the tone, even though it was online, was completely inspiring and hopeful. We are even more fired up at the idea of doing a national conference next year and taking some of these conversations to see the same conversation a year later. What does it sound like now? So with that in mind, I want to say thank you, and thank you to our tech people who've been fabulous. And I look forward to continuing all this work, to having more and more successes. Yes, there will be recordings. Every session has been recorded and will be on our website, and you'll get an email to tell you that. So have a good rest of your day. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. And we will see you next year in person at a hotel in Southern California. Thank you.